So the future of content and information isn't going to be the same. Static content won't cut it for the consumer in the future. But that also applies to the advertising that we, all of us, create and utilize as part of the new medium. All content has to share those properties, including the advertising. Sorry, I double-clicked here. And that's an important concept for us. If you think about a new world of content, a world in which everything is integrated, social, digital, and relevant, and ads fit in that context, it's a different kind of a world. If you think about what the future looks like, I talked a little bit about the how, kind of how content behaves and kind of what you might be doing and the fact that ads have to look like it. We should also stop and say, how are people going to be spending their time consuming information and consuming content? If I go back, I don't know, to when I was a kid, content consumption was reasonably simple. Particularly, I lived 3 years as a young kid in Belgium. I was living I spoke no Flemish and no French. When I arrived, my media experiences were particularly limited. 1 or 2 TV programs a week in English, an English language newspaper, and maybe a couple of comic books. And there weren't too many places to reach, even my parents who had more sophisticated interests at the time. Today, you think about the ways in which people spend their time consuming content. There's search. We don't actually use search as the end destination, but search is an important point to let us broaden out and learn about and find the things we're looking for. There's social content. There's social websites that are all about letting me interact with friends. Concept that didn't exist before. There's personal content. The things that I read, that I author, that I create. If you just stop in your mind and model, of all the words that you read in a day, what percentage come from a book, a website, a Word or PowerPoint document, a television show, a magazine, a newspaper? That's shifted so radically over the last several years. In my own case, I'd say most of what I read is somehow personal information, or at least personal in my business context. But there's personal websites. There's professional content. Content that somebody actually has to have a cost base to produce. Certainly when you think about today's TV shows, books, newspapers, etc. It's super important. And yet what we found in the age of the web is there are plenty of websites that are not professionally, quote, produced, unquote, that wind up capturing the time and imagination of people. There's platforms that let users generate their own content. Twitter, Facebook, just as a few examples of that kind of medium. That stuff's more and more important today than ever before. Ever before. Advertiser sites. Sites that you build. Sites that are important to you to tell your story is an important part of the pool of information and content in this digital world. And then, of course, there's just millions and millions of other websites that don't fit in any of the categories I outlined. What's the point? The point is every one of these websites, every one of these experiences that captivate, that take time from consumers, every one of them is likely to have a different business model. Some of them are likely to say, we're just free. We're free because the company or the person who built this doesn't have economic needs. We're free because this helps support some other business. When you create a website for one of your accounts, that account isn't about the website. It's about some other product. Some of these things will actually be ad-funded. That's classic, traditional. Some people are saying, hey, look, ad-funded websites have not led to enormous profitability. If you take a look at the internet today, certainly Google makes a lot of money on their search site. But once you get past the Google search site and you say, is there a publisher, a content producer that's making a lot of money with an advertising or a fee-based model, the answer is no. So as all of us sit here as advertisers, we have to ask, who will be creating the content that people spend time on? What is their motivation? Will they even have advertising on their websites? Many websites that are very popular don't take advertising. And so the notion of how people spend their time, where advertising can be relevant, where it makes sense to the publisher, is all super important. Super important. And as we think about the problems of digital advertising, I don't start with the advertising. I actually start with the content environments and say, do the content and website environments create places where you can put relevant and interesting and appropriate advertising or not? And I think that question is somewhat in the balance as we move forward.